Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Joan and the Chappaqua Library for believing in this topic. It's an ongoing concern locally, nationally, and worldwide. And I'm personally grateful that four awesome local media representatives are here today to discuss this as much as we can in our limited time period. I'm going to introduce each one as quickly as I can so we can get right into it. Today we have with us David Mckay. I did it alphabetically. Oh, actually, I didn't. I did Lohud. Okay. David Mckay Wilson, the Tax Watch columnist for the Journal News, who has written on local news for 46 years, including the past 37 years in the Hudson Valley. His assignment at Gannett in Westchester have included City Hall in White Plains, New Rochelle and Yonkers, county government in Westchester and Putnam, the State House, as well as regional coverage on education, transportation, and politics. As a freelancer, he has written for the New York Times, Boston Globe, and alumni magazines at 125 colleges and universities around the nation. Thank you for being here, David. Okay. Also here with Lohud is Asher Stockler, who was born and raised in Scarsdale, New York, so he's local. Graduated from Scarsdale High School in 2012 and then from New York University in 2016. He has worked for the Journal News since 2021, focusing on local government corruption, police misconduct, and legal affairs. Welcome, Asher. We also have here today Martin Wilbur, who has been editor-in-chief of the Examiner News since it was founded in 2007. He has more than 30 years' experience covering local news in Westchester and Putnam counties, which includes a focus on local government, planning, zoning, and development issues in education. His first experience was covering neighborhoods in his native Brooklyn during and immediately after college in the 1980s. Welcome, Martin. And finally, in this really esteemed panel, we have Michelle Falkenstein, who is an award-winning freelance journalist who covers culture with a specialty in the visual arts. She has written for the New York Times, Art News Magazine, where she was a contributing editor, Hadassah Magazine, the Journal News, the Albany Times Union, among others. She earned a bachelor's degree in literature and creative writing at Binghamton University, a Master of Arts in Literature at NYU, and a Master of Science in Journalism at Columbia University. Welcome, Michelle. Okay, I'm gonna open it up with a few comments just from my research a little bit, and then I'm gonna launch into some questions so we can get right to it too. The New York Times has reported that since 2005, some 2,500 newspapers in the United States, that's a quarter of them, have closed, and that the country is set up to lose 1/3 of its newspapers by 2025. I'm not sure if that's going to come to pass, but that was something that was predicted a few years ago and is online. The Times also notes that hundreds of local newspapers shut down at the start of the pandemic, and that in many places, the surviving local media outlets have made major cuts to staff and circulation. So I thought it was important to have a check-in with our local media. I think in Westchester, we've bucked the trend a little bit, but I'm not 100% certain because I'm not intimately involved in their particular publishers, with their publishers, but we'll talk about it. If I may express my own opinion at the outset, and this is the only time I'm going to pontificate a little bit, the influence and purpose of journalism and the value of the Fourth Estate has been clear for centuries. It needs no apologizing or so-called convincing. This panel is taking place in the hometown of Horace Greeley, founder of the New York Tribune, and I encourage everyone to visit the Greeley House and the Newcastle Historical Society to learn about the rich history of journalism right here in this town, in Newcastle. I have read about Greeley's expressed anti-slavery writings, which had a huge influence on hearts and minds in the North, at least, or perhaps further, during a shameful period of American history. From political corruption to the pandemic, to all the Pulitzers awarded year after year, to people nationally and locally and regionally, there's never been a shortage of poignant reminders of the enduring value of the craft of journalism. In trying times like these, our nation could use not less journalism, but more. And we need new government funding and research and a template for saving and even expanding journalism. Preparing for this, I watched footage from concerned reporters and editors from the LA Times to Australia and read a summary of the New York Times panel on this topic called The Future of News. It's definitely worth a read. And thought, what if we could take a closer look at this at the local level? It's been stated widely that without an informed citizenry, we are at risk of demagogues and tyranny, whatever side of the political aisle it rises from. We know that the first thing demagogues do is shut down the press or turn them into personal organs. Is this something we need to worry about at the local level? I'm going to ask each of you to discuss the risks first of an uninformed citizenry and offer an anecdote or two of how you personally have made a difference as a reporter to keep readers informed and officials accountable. And to talk about, here's your opening right now, generally about your concerns for the Fourth Estate and the future of journalism. I thought that I'd start with you, Asher, because you were at the end of that table there, and you're the youngest person here. And I love that you're called an accountability reporter. So I thought that really spoke to, and I know that you're all accountability reporters, but that's your title. So, I know you've been particularly interested in police misconduct and monitoring government. So tell me a little bit about what I've talked about and the importance of an informed citizenry and your concerns about your role as a journalist.
Sure. Thank you very much for convening the panel. It's a really great idea. So I think, one of the things I've struggled with sort of being relatively new to the news business is sort of taking for granted, I guess, that stories you work on and investigations you pursue are going to immediately resonate with the public, right? You could be looking into something that is an incidence of misconduct or sort of some troubling allegation, and you'll publish a story and then you'll find nobody reads it. There are, I guess, a whole host of reasons that might be the case, but I think, with the changing media landscape, especially the ways people consume media, it's very difficult to sort of adapt the traditional structure of news to a lot of newfangled media, right? Like, I don't know how I could condense a story per se about, police brutality into a TikTok. I don't have that particular expertise, but and it does make a difference because unless you reach people, there's sort of no public pressure, public outcry, and that seems to be the only thing that a lot of politicians respond to is when they know their constituents are upset. I think there's this rising tide, as you alluded to, of hostility towards the media, and a lot of politicians they notice what's going on. They see the cutbacks that news organizations, including my own, are making, and they see us as less powerful in society, inherently powerful. So I think that my experience is that they're less responsive to probing questions, to demands for accountability. So we sort of have to work on our own through sort of like outside, tactics to pursue a story because often we don't get the cooperation of the government. So it's difficult, I would say. One of the biggest challenges I faced is connecting with a younger audience and making sure that they care in the same way that I think probably previous generations. And I mean, part of that is also, I think, the sort of diversification of news stories in that, everyone used to subscribe to the same 5 or 6 papers and all read the same stories. But now there's just so much media out there. Everyone's not reading the same thing. Everyone's not listening to the same thing. So it's hard to build sort of a collective response among the public to something because you're just one drop in a large stream of content that people have to sift through. So the challenge, my primary challenge, to sort of summarize things, has been just connecting with people for things are important and that people could care about, right? There's the potential for people to care about, but sort of how do you present it in a way that is conscious of the modern ways people consume their news?
Okay. Thank you. We'll go this way. David, your turn. If you would like to address dangers of an uninformed citizenry and how you make sure that doesn't happen and your concerns for journalism.
Yeah, well, back in the day, when I started with Gannett in 1986, the 80s and the 90s, you people were here. You knew every town was covered, every school board. You got that Sunday newspaper that was like this, right? With the sports section, the arts. We had coverage of. Martin was there at the same time. We both started at the same time in the late 80s, the heyday, right? That time through the 90s, oh my God. We had so many journalists, the whole Hudson Valley, couple hundred. But that's, of course, is all changed. So we're adapting to that. You don't have the kid delivering the newspaper anymore. We have trouble even finding people to do, because now it's fewer and fewer. We still believe in subscriptions, digital subscriptions. That's what our answer is, digital subscriptions. And I would, of course, encourage anybody who's interested in local journalism to give us a chance. $1 for 3 months. Honest to God, $1 for 3 months. Give us a chance. Go on that Lohud.com. Read our stories, see what Asher's writing, see what I'm a columnist there. I got 2 columns a week, basically. Sometimes write about this community. I write about all communities around Westchester. So it's, I just think that there's a great opportunity. There's still a huge hunger for people to know what's going on in their communities. What are the issues? What's happening? Have some oversight of government, some oversight. And that's, journalists do that. We provide oversight.
David, for people who don't know your work well, can you give us an example of maybe something you're currently working on, maybe the situation in Carmel or in Mamaroneck or?
Yeah. I've just been writing about Village Mamaroneck, where it's very high pressure kind of political government scene there, and they approved the village manager's new contract in a secret vote, and people were up in arms. And I was able to write about that. Okay. Government, accountability, openness. And that's one story. And then I just did a big thing about slavery in our area back in the 17 and 1800s, and how state parks are reimagining their exhibits to consider the enslaved people. So I kind of get to touch on a lot of different topics, and my content is just premium content. You've got to have a subscription to read it.
Yes, and I'm gonna dig into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
And the pros and cons of that too, because we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Michelle, why don't you address the question of an uninformed citizenry and examples of how your own impact has made sure that's not the case, and your concerns about the future of journalism.
Well, since I went to journalism school, since those days, there were concerns. I think I did a little research in advance of this as well, and one of the things I found was that in 2019, the Pew Research Center found that 54% of Americans got their news sometimes or often from social media, the number one source being Facebook. So, it's alarming, really. Mm-hmm. There's something called news deserts that people think about and write about and study. And in places where there is no coverage of what's happening, people end up, first of all, they end up paying more to live in these communities because they're not aware of, tax things that are going on with taxes and that sort of thing, or pet projects that might come up and they're not aware of. But they also don't vote as much. They don't feel as invested, and they're, it's social media. I think has had a huge impact. It's sort of, in a way, it's hard to explain when you tell people you're a journalist, I think a lot of people think they're reporting, quote unquote, because they have a blog or they posted something they have a lot of followers on Instagram or, whatever. So it's sort of muddied the whole landscape in a very significant way, I think.
You've gotten into my next question. I'm glad. This is good. It's like the elephant in the room came right on stage.
Oh, thank you. I mean, if I could just say one more thing. I haven't covered many controversial topics. I mean, I have covered, because I do write about the arts, I have covered, there was a case of a guy who was printing somebody else's photographs, Lewis Hine photographs, and saying they were vintage, which they weren't, and I had to call him. It was like this whole crazy and they were selling them for a lot of money as if they were vintage. But on the other, the way I feel that it's really, have lost out, communities have lost out is, I used to write, I had a column in the Times for the Regional Weekly, for the New Jersey Regional Weekly. I wrote for Westchester also, but it was called Footnotes, and I would have little items, like 4 or 5 items, every week of things that were happening in the local theater world or, dance performances or whatever. And when that section went away, I heard from a lot of the people, the organizations I used to write about, their sales went down like crazy. I mean,
I remember that.
If you're not writing about these things, you don't get the exposure for what's going on in the art world. It also is a big, one could argue, I mean, I think very effectively, that communities where the arts are not an important part of community life are suffering from lack of,
lack of coverage.
Yeah. So anyway.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll get back to that. I found that interesting. All right, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with a lot of what has been said already.
That's okay.
The thing is that there's 2 levels of lack of information, and that there's the uninformed and then there's the misinformed. And what has been said before and what you said, Michelle, about the social media is that, every community just about in Westchester has its own mom's page, and community, whatever page, you're from, from whatever town, you're logged on to this. And there's some good information, and people are new to the area and they're looking for a new pediatrician they don't know from the area that might take their insurance. But there's also a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot to something that's true many times, but there's that nuance that's missing, that really people, not to to blow our own horns too much, but we're able to most of the time sift through that nuance, because that's what we do for a living, and try to get to put more context into it. And it's not just what someone might be screaming about on social media, and they may also have an agenda as well to get certain items out. And David mentioned about how we were kind of contemporaries. I was, for a period of time, I worked at the old Reporter Dispatch up in Putnam, where there were 6 full-time reporters. And why were there 6? Because there were 6 towns and 6 school districts, and we each had one. And when you consider, just in about 30 years, just over 30 years, the diminishment of that, it is alarming. Because every town had their own reporter, and now we're stretched so thin. Even with the Examiner, I feel like a guy with 1 bucket, but I've got 10 places where my roof is leaking. I'm just running around, and it's a challenge. But I think that you alluded to, Grace, that in Westchester we're relatively lucky, because there is an informed citizenry, or a citizenry that wants to learn more about what's going on. And also there's, let's face it, in order to run a media operation, you need money, just like any place else. And there is enough disposable income among businesses and organizations that a lot of places around the country do not have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Michelle, you began the discussion about that, what I was going to call the elephant in the room, which is social media. What I was going to, I wanted to add that when I first joined Facebook, it was about, I think, 10 or 11 years ago at this point. I don't know, when did we all get on? I was immediately concerned about the 24/7 marketplace and suggested a Facebook-free Friday. I called it TGIFF. Thank God it's Facebook-free Friday. And everybody thought I was crazy, and no one was having it. So I shut the page down. And then when in Rome, I've been as guilty as anyone using social media to the max. And primarily as a publisher, I'll admit, to keep a presence with current advertisers. After all, they're almost all universally on now, and I use the word on a little facetiously because it's quite addictive. I've personally become addicted to the process. I find it very hard to disconnect for any length of time. I think that's true of a lot of my peers as well. And that's a topic that I think does relate to the future of journalism as the online marketplace keeps growing and growing, and funds are being diverted to Facebook and Google advertising away from media companies. That's been the crux of the reason of all the newspapers folding. They laughed off the internet at the outset, and then the media giants are just absorbing a lot of that advertising. So I wanted to ask you each to talk about how you personally are expected as a journalist to use social media as reporters, whether you are or not, I don't really know, and how that has impacted your work, the quality of your work. Maybe it's made it better. Maybe it's just made it different. I don't want to, catastrophize unnecessarily. How has it affected your productivity? Are you each duly as addicted as I am? How does it impact ultimately your time performing reporter tasks? What do you think that it all says about consumer habits and the future of journalism? Okay, I know that's a big one. Asher, you start.
All right, so I'll take each one of those questions in turn.
Okay,
Or
yes.
just
Okay.
try to synthesize.
No, I mean, really, how has social media impacted your career?
Well, I am thankful at Lohud, a legacy outlet. There are no pressures to sort of perform on social media. That is definitely not the case for a lot of other primarily online outlets. I think social media is probably one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, to a robust news industry. The monopolization, the monopoly power that social media has, just Facebook and the other popular social media websites, YouTube is really big, single-handedly can decide which content performs well, which content doesn't perform well based on minute algorithmic changes. And unfortunately, you have a lot of online news organizations that derive all of their, still for some ill-advised reason, all of their ad revenue, or all of their revenue just from sort of really cheap ad sales. So one slight shift in the algorithm and their ad revenue is tanking and their business model is destroyed. So they're basically chasing the unpredictable algorithmic changes that these 2 or 3 social media companies make, and it's disastrous. And we're not tethered to that, thankfully. That's not the case for a lot of them. Yeah, no, but that's not. But the problem is, I think there is very little, I think, general media literacy, and I don't mean media literacy in the classic sense. I mean literacy about the industry itself. People don't realize what goes on in a modern newsroom. They don't realize the pressures a lot of news organizations face, and that a lot of newsrooms are chasing their, we've always had this, if it bleeds, it leads, right? That's sort of a classic slogan. Mm-hmm. But clickbait is sort of that notion on steroids. And it, even with if it bleeds, it leads, I think a lot of times it was sensationalized version of some sort of factual basis. But a lot of clickbait now is truly, there's no, news has the word new in it. There's no new information. It's some regurgitation of something that's already public just because they want you to click on it. So it's not designed to convey information. So I think that a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of that content performs really well, and it's just this self-destructive cycle.
And the clickbait has all those ads embedded in it,
Exactly.
all that stuff. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
David, social media.
Well, I'm a boomer, and I love Facebook. I know that's not popular in some settings, but I really do. I'm connected with my family. I'm connected with the broader political community in Westchester County, people who I've interviewed over these 35 years. I post every one of my stories on Facebook. Peter Giles, he's chimed in a couple times, and we have it's a nice discussion. It's part of my journalism, is being on Facebook and having these interactions with people who I know, friends of mine, my family, chiming in on my stories. So it's an engagement that I enjoy, and I think it's got to be part of journalists today. Facebook, Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I don't get as much action on Twitter as I do on Facebook.
Do you post your stories?
Oh yeah,
I retweet you.
I get action on Facebook, not Twitter. I'm too old for
So
Twitter.
you're not, just so I understand, you're not required
I'm
to?
in the wrong
or
demographic.
is that expected of you by the publisher and your
They like
editor? They like it
no,
all.
they like, yeah, well, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm out there.
Does it impede your reporting time?
No,
and
I get tips. I
Okay,
get tips
so it's a good
back
thing.
from the people who I connect with, on the back channel, Facebook Messenger, highly secure.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Right. Michelle, do you want to say any more about social media, or do you feel like you
A little
kind
bit.
of, okay.
I think in general, I've noticed a change in readers, the way readers consume. You can't write long anymore. Not really long. I mean, if I get 800 words, I tend to write too long, which is my problem. But if I get 800 words, I feel like I hit the jackpot. Usually they don't have it. People just don't want to read anymore those kind of stories. I do post my stories on Instagram and Facebook, to get people to click on them. I feel that I owe it to the people that are paying me, as a freelancer, to try to get them get them their stories read. I tend to avoid Twitter because I just think it's I just have a problem with Twitter. There's a lot of crazy stuff there. But I also think something that does concern me about people using social media to consume news is that the way the algorithms work, and you mentioned this briefly, if you click on things that agree with what you already think and you spend more time on them, these algorithms will give you more of that.
Correct.
So I think this has actually led people down these kind of separate paths. So I never see anything that I find, oh my God, I don't believe that. That's,
And you've said that it just deepens the
everything
divide.
I see,
Yeah.
it agrees with what I already think, because they want you to, if you're not going to click on something, they're not going to keep giving it to you. So I think it really puts people and we see it in our country now, this huge political divide that's only getting wider all the time because no one is seeing the other side's arguments, which they may agree or not agree with, but it really has divided people a lot more, I think, the way the algorithms work.
Is it an uphill battle when I personally can post a press release as a piece of sponsored news? I can market sponsored news and get hundreds of likes to something that just pulled a heartstring, and then I could work my tail off on something serious with several sources, spend a day or two to get it online, and then it's like a big snooze. Is it the quality? Is it people's attention spans are just so shot? And what does that say to the future of journalism, Martin?
Yeah, I think our attention spans, even among the most highly educated, are shorter than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. The world just moves faster than it ever did. News moves faster. There are more outlets and more places to consume from. So you stick with something for, maybe a few paragraphs, and if you're really interested in it, you'll stick with it for a few more.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that's always been the case a little bit with news. There's, when we were all in school, it was, you set up a story with the inverted pyramid just in case you lose people, 3-4 paragraphs into the story. You try and put as much as you can about the story in the first 35 words. And so there's always been that element to news, but I think the longer form journalism, which that's suffered. There are some places, some magazines that are online that still do it really well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think on a newspaper level, that's kind of been lost because we've all pretty much pared down our staffs to be able to keep going and cut expenses to the level where we can still have an operation. Because inflation hits us just as much as any other business.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also I personally don't use a lot of, I consume social media. I don't get involved. I don't contribute all that much because just keeping up with what's going on in the local area, that consumes more of my time than I really even have time for. But so I do consume it, and it has its place. You can interact with the community, and there are stories that we've posted online that our operation, our office, we post a lot of our material on Facebook and different social media, and it gets picked up. Out in California, I had one editor of a paper in England asked us to if they could reprint a column that we ran. They were going to they'll give us credit for it. And notice that it was from the Examiner in Westchester County, and that would never happen. Before that. So there are the advantages of it as well. So you have to keep that in mind.
Okay. How do you build trust among readers? That you can all answer that. We'll come back to you, and I know the Examiner has something called the Trust Project that you've been touting. So, Asher.
Yeah, that is a really good question and something I'm always thinking about. I think one of the most important things with building trust is. Especially now, when there's so much misinformation, right? Well, okay, so maybe a couple responses. One is, I think, there's this challenge of something I've seen described as like the templatization of news, where it's, anyone can go online on Canva or whatever and make a blog or some kind of, social media card that looks really professional, right? So, all we have as Lohud or the Examiner or any other legacy paper is our credibility because, we have a splashy logo, but so does anyone. So how does the uninformed media consumer know? We have, decades and decades as an institution to sort of rely on, and this person and someone else with an equally sort of attractive, typeface and display could just be one person who just made that up on the spot, right? So I think trust has to come a little bit from your history and relationships, so people know, right, this is Lohud. We didn't spring up out of nowhere. We're a local institution. So that's why I think, a lot of newer news sites have a little bit of trouble doing that, right, because they're not known entities. The other thing is, I think, just sort of the classic mantra in journalism is transparency, right? Be transparent with your readers about what you know, what you don't know, and sometimes, if it's not too laborious, take them a little bit behind the scenes in your story about the process of reporting, right? I know, a lot of times an article will just say something is true, but often it's good to attribute it or say, how you got that information so the reader can make the judgment on how reliable that is. So just through the reporting, try to be as transparent as possible about the source of your information. And I think people, if they do stumble on your article, if, they're served with a lot of content on Facebook that's, would lead them elsewhere. But if they do end up reading your article, that they're sort of confident reading it, I'm not relying necessarily on this person's credibility. I can sort of, I can see how they put the puzzle together through all the pieces.
David, you've been criticized by different readers at different points, or when you've been controversial. So how do you respond when readers aren't nice? That's my question.
Oh,
You know, when readers are.
The readers
Yeah.
are the one. No, the readers are always nice. It's
Okay.
sometimes
Wrong word.
the government officials.
Okay.
Sometimes the government
Thank you.
officials.
I mean, those readers.
aren't nice, like the town supervisor in my own town who, during a town meeting, I was videoing the guy who I'd busted his illegal sewer pipe to his restaurant, a guy in a town board. And he got fined $100,000. And when I was taking a video, his son-in-law is yelling at me in the face. He comes along and snatches my phone out of my hand like I was on the beach at Cape May, and he's like a seagull snatching it. Takes my phone and heaves it into the street. Breaks my phone right in town hall. Anyways.
Yes. Okay.
Anyways,
Yes, go ahead.
it's and then you have, the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party making all of these baseless claims about the press and this whole fake news mentality that we somehow have to earn the trust back because of these baseless charges against the press, which I think is undermining freedom of the press in our country. And it's really, that's an added burden that we, this disbelief of, anyways.
Okay. Yeah. Michelle, as a freelance writer, I think you mentioned to me once that the fees are just far lower than they were once upon a time.
Yes.
That the written word has just become cheapened. And
Yes.
that's, I can remember as a freelance writer for national women's magazines, the day where I get $2-3 grand a story. I think those days are gone.
Oh, they're well gone.
Yes, I haven't tried in a long
Yes.
time.
They
I
don't
don't
have
think
the
I
money.
want to, but
Yeah, no, it's a nicely, I have a day job. I mean, I can't live on what I make. I mean, it's lovely. I love doing it. I would never stop, but I won't work for nothing. That's one of my rules. But I work for close to nothing, I would say. But I love it, so I do it, and I have a salary, so it's okay. But I think it's very hard for people to get into this now, and I see people that, they're still cranking them out at Columbia, I mean,
Mhm.
and I don't know, these kids are coming out with and it's a lot more expensive, I think, even exponentially, accounting for inflation than what we paid to go there.
Yep.
And I don't know, how they're managing, to be honest with you. I
Are
mean,
they romanticizing the
$75,000.
profession a little, and then once they're in the
Yeah, well, it's a great
trenches.
field. I mean, but I think it's something I think about is I agree completely with this idea of the fake news. All that has really been hard.
Mhm.
But I think the obsession with celebrity and our youth, which is there's always been, I guess, since the 50s, there's been this idea about youth and the youth culture and all that. But I think it's at as high a pitch as it's ever been now. And I think the idea of you were saying about the history of the organization and its sort of reputation, all that. I don't know that works for us anymore. I mean, I don't know if young people really are impressed with that sort of thing.
Mhm.
They just think, oh, they're just a bunch of old, it's an old thing, and I need something new. And
Asher?
if Kim Kardashian isn't saying it, it's probably not true or whatever. So I think this whole focus on celebrity and those people being experts at something, I don't know, is really. And I see people, I mean, I'm not trying to criticize anyone, but I see people. No one's living in the world. Everyone's living on their phone, taking selfies and posting things. So
Well, also, if you're following enough powerful, popular personalities, people who have quote unquote, social media influencers,
right.
it eats into your time of the day to read the news and pay attention to the news. So I think there's that impact as well. That it's you at some point you have to make choices of what you're consuming in
Yes.
media. So you were going to talk about trust a little bit more.
Trust. This is definitely an oversimplification of trust, but I think you gain trust by doing really good work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the simplest and most straightforward method. And if people don't trust you, don't trust what they read,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna drop you. So it's to your advantage and to your organization to be trusted. And how you do that is doing good work, doing good journalism. We're in an enviable position of, we almost intentionally don't do celebrity journalism. Sure, there are times, where there are enough famous people living in our coverage area where you're going to cross paths with them and you're going to write about them. But our focus is the local town boards and villages and the local kids and students who are doing great things both on the athletic field, on the performance stage as students. And as a result, there's people in these communities that we cover, from White Plains up through Putnam County, really enjoy that, and they go out of their way for that. But there's how you also build trust is, make sure if you get an email or if you get a letter that criticizes the work that you did, as long as it's not libelous or profane, you print it. And I know a lot of we've had letter writers who said, I never thought you would print that letter because it maybe goes against the tide of Westchester communities, many of which have become increasingly democratic, and it may be a more conservative point of view. And I said, as long as it meets the standards of decency and is not debatable, it's not just known lies. If it's a point of view that you have that's different than most of your neighbors and most of our readers, that's a big way of getting back trust. Admitting that you're wrong when you're wrong, printing corrections, putting editor's notes to clarify. All of that plays into being trusted.
Okay.
So.
Let's talk about the tools of the trade and how it's changed and how it's changing. Maybe start with video as being supposedly, like, if you don't have video, you're going to hurt. So how much is Lohud, Examiner, News using video? And even as a freelance writer, do you feel that you need to videotape as you go around doing stories? Are you expected to get some footage for social media? And let's talk about video. I think it's a huge piece of the puzzle right now, too, on the future of journalism. Maybe it's a good thing that, it's going to, as we introduce new tools, it'll beef up our future. So Asher,
Sure,
you start with that.
I think I want to tie that a little bit to social media as well. I think, there's something, towards the, I think, late 2000s, early 2010s, there was this sort of disastrous era, I guess known internally in the news industry as the great pivot to video, when I guess you have the advent of the iPhone and a lot of smartphone technology, and a lot of news outlets sort of misguidedly blasted all of their content with video at the top of every article, laying off news reporters, hiring video producers, just threw a ton of money at it. And that that ended, I think, in disaster. Almost all, if not most, I think, of those new hires from that era were ultimately laid off, because it's the same. I think I'm sort of, if you analogize it to social media, it's you're always chasing the next high, right? But that's going to wear off. The algorithmic incentives are going to switch. And so I think video has proved itself to be, in many respects, very elusive in that way. No, video is sort of just to make sure I'm being clear, it's absolutely its own legitimate form of journalism. So I'm sort of focusing specifically more on just video as cheap content in order to, the reason why it was so attractive to a lot of news organizations is because there would be the videos would play automatically when you went on these websites, and there would be pre-roll ads. So they'd get tons of cheap ad revenue just from visiting the website. So not talking about the video content itself, but just sort of the manner in which it was presented. I think video has turned out to be this sort of false god in many ways, at least recently, in terms of like, this is going to be the thing that sustains journalism. Fortunately at Lohud, again, we don't, we're not reliant on video views to sustain our bottom line. So I don't think we were affected too much sort of by the rise and collapse of the pivot to video, but a lot of outlets were, and you did see a lot of layoffs like about a decade ago after that sort of industry-wide strategy collapsed.
I forgot my phone. Could somebody just tell me where we are?
10 of 8.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, well,
so we're going to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
Maybe let's talk about, artificial intelligence as we come down the line.
Apropos the video thing, just today we were experimenting with new video approaches
Yes.
at the Journal News, and actually today I did a video with the a CPA. I write the Tax Watch column at the Journal News, so some of the issues I deal with, tax policy, tax issues. We did a tax hotline with the volunteer CPAs, and we took all the best questions, the 5 different things: retirement accounts, Social Security, et cetera, and we did a video of each one of these. I wrote a short story. This is going to go online, lohud.com, with the videos of me having a conversation with the CPA on these tax issues that are helpful to people in the community, filing their taxes, a service to the community. Anyways, it's part of our where we're going with it.
Michelle?
I don't have to. I do have to often shoot my own stories, photography.
Yes.
Which I don't mind doing. I like doing it. But I don't. There were a few stories I did for Lohud actually that I had to. They sent a videographer because there was something particularly photogenic about it. There was once a guy, an artist, who was he had been in Willowbrook for like 35 years, and then he came out. He was a very good artist, and he was, so he was an interesting guy, and so they made a video about him.
Okay.
And a few other things, but it was never really something that, of course I find it personally irritating when to watch videos when I'm reading. I'd rather read, but I'm probably, a dinosaur in some ways. But, when I see like on CNN, there's a video I can click on or read a story, I never click on it. I just don't find it that appealing. And sometimes they do launch, I mean, you don't have a choice.
And
Or
then
they're
there
only video,
are all the reels that we're seeing on social media. I mean, it gets pretty intricate.
Yeah.
Another topic. Okay, Martin.
There are certain stories that lend itself more. I think just to have video, just because there are some publications that have videos with every story pretty much, doesn't mean, I know the way we operate, there are certain stories that really lend itself to it. I do cover a lot of government meetings or press conferences. You can find those on Facebook Live or the local media site. Every community either they're now on, put almost all their meetings on a local site, like Newcastle Media Center and their other ones, or Facebook Live. So you don't really need to do that, but there are certain stories that lend itself. If someone has a bombshell announcement that they're resigning from office, if they hold a press conference, you might want to have a 15-second clip of them doing that. Did a story this week about a 4-year-old kid over in Armonk who is he won a competition at Carnegie Hall a few months ago, and he was just really astounding. This kid, and his teacher had like a 2-minute clip of his winning performance, and that story, it lent itself. We had to ask for it, and have it accompany the story, the article. But just I think your random meetings or just random news or typical news stories, unless there's some major thing that you want to hear the person directly from them, a lot of it is just distraction.
Okay, thank you. Because we're running out of time and we're supposed to open this up, I want to just I'm going to skip the rest of my questions and let the panel, if there were points that you had hoped to get across that I didn't ask you, I'm going to give you one last chance, and then we'll open it up. So, Asher, if you're good, we can keep. You're good? Okay, David, anything?
I just want to thank the people of Chappaqua. I've written many stories in this community over the past 20 years. Some of them very meaningful to me. There's a 3,500-word piece on that I wrote on 2 years ago when the discussion on the form-based code, and really, spent a good deal of time here and interviewed a lot of people. I think really told a story about what was going down here at that time, all the pressures, the school district. It was just the housing issue. Anyways, yes, I did. Thank you. And I have a few copies that I left out on the, if anybody's interested, it's still online too, but it was really, when I look back, it was 3,500 word piece. I don't think I've written anything that long.
You wrote
since.
a great piece for me on where to go bike riding.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was 20 years ago.
At least, no.
It was 15 years
15
ago.
years ago,
15
yes.
years
That's
ago.
fine.
15 years
Still
ago.
good places to go bike riding.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Michelle, anything you want to add to the conversation? And, maybe one thing that I had hoped to talk about was subscriptions versus advertising as a way to maintain the model of journalism, and which is the future, if you have a sense of that. And,
Well, so
maybe we need a bunch of publishers here.
I write for,
Yeah.
newspapers. I send it links to all my friends. I put them on Facebook. And sometimes they get to the point they say, oh, I can't click on this anymore. And
Paywalls.
I can't, right, paywalls. And and some of my friends have, very nicely gotten subscriptions just so they could read me. But I think,
That works.
I'm not, I don't know. It seems like, I know there's a lot, there are organizations that just open it all up, but there are plenty that don't,
I think
and
there's
don't
still a little
know-
wild west going on of
Yeah.
publishers just tentatively trying different things and not really exactly knowing based on research what will work and what won't. It's just kind of
Right,
trial by
right.
fire a little bit, would you say?
Right, yeah. I mean, 99 cents for 3 months, and then, and then you have to pay a lot more.
15.
more
Then it's 15. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But
it goes
you
up.
got to pay the band.
You got to reel them
Got to
in.
pay the band.
Right. Yeah,
So as a
exactly.
writer,
So,
the paywalls are discouraging because you want your people, but as a publisher, there means more income. But then
Well-
again, as a publisher, the advertisers don't love it because that's fewer eyeballs. So it's a
Yeah.
It's
You gotta find
it's
the
a balancing
balance.
act,
Gotta
right?
find
you
the
know what the
balance.
answer is
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Martin,
And it-
any last comments before we? Yeah.
And journalism, just like many, many fields, it continuously evolves, and it will continually evolve as technology evolves. We
Mhm.
don't know the next platform or the next thing 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years down. We just know it's going to change. It's going to
Mhm.
continue to change. And the organizations that survive are the ones who will best be able to adapt to whatever might come down the pike. And that's the challenge, to be nimble enough to still practice that meat and potatoes journalism and do it well, but to shift with the times, whatever that calls for. And that's the great challenge, because if we were tech whizzes, we wouldn't be sitting here.
Right.
We'd be out in Silicon Valley or somewhere. So we don't know what that might be, but it's going to come.
All right, I want to thank you all for all your comments and all your answers to my questions. And now I'm going to open it up to the floor. If there's any, I see. Okay, go ahead. If you want, do you? Are we asking about Lohud and Examiner Media?
An examiner.
Both. Subscribe. Subscribe.
Oh.
I just renewed my swear to God.
Thank you.
I have I subscribe to everything.
Okay. Was that a question? I'm sorry. Was
Yeah.
for you to ask how many people subscribe? Oh, okay. Yes. Should I ask you that or just ask the, okay, why did someone drop their subscription? Anybody? Okay.
It would be, hold on.
Local news had sort of become irrelevant, and I hadn't really been keeping up with it. And then I started to notice the Examiner was available at grocery stores, and I just said, oh, I knew it was going to be some sort of trashy, all advertising kind of a thing, and it turned out it wasn't at all. In fact, it was serious, really well-researched journalism that's very relevant to what I was looking for, and I just was amazed. And of course, I didn't have to pay for it, which was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, well, there's a bazillion advertisers in here, of course, but intermixed with that is some really good quality journalism. And so I came back to local reportage.
I don't know that there's that much of a question that readers are appreciating the content. I've been mailing my magazine for 20 years, and I could count on, all right, 2 hands, 1 foot, how many people want to get taken off the mailing list. That tells me they're appreciating information in these communities. The question becomes, the harder question is sustainability and sustaining it and keeping them funded. I remember when I started inside Chappaqua, there was a robust period where I had 60 advertisers in one magazine. And now I probably have half that. So to compensate, I've raised rates to fewer advertisers. I've juggled things as a publisher to keep them coming. But it's hard, it is hard. And getting reader subscriptions is now part of the plan, but I'm finding that very difficult. I almost feel guilty. I think if people want to subscribe, they should really subscribe to the news organizations. But if you have a secondary income, you could throw some my way. That's fine. But no, I think the news organizations really need it. I'm also getting older, so if it didn't work, it didn't work. But it's fine. I really think if you're going to subscribe first to your local news organizations. And I say that with adoration for our panelists here and for the hard work that they do. It's what I do is a different ballgame, but it's still valuable, and I think people should subscribe to me too. But if it's a choice, subscribe to your local newspaper or newspapers, along with your legacy New York Times, Washington Post. There should be at least one local outlet that you subscribe to. That's my pitch today to the world.
So I do subscribe to Lohud, but I'll point out that there was a period when I didn't, because it is so difficult to find out how much it costs. You give an introductory rate, and then when it's over, it's like, just resubscribe. I had to put in so much time to find out how much it was going to cost. And eventually I did. I think I had to write to somebody, but it's not that expensive, but you never know. The Wall Street Journal is what, $40 a month or something? But since I have the microphone, let me just compliment Martin, the Examiner. You had a great series about Caremount. And to me, that was an example of the power of local journalism, and gives you, anybody who read that and is a patient at Caremount, probably, more optimism about the future of local journalism. But David, that story about the form-based code was incredible, and I'm only sorry more people didn't get to read it before the election last year.
Good for you, David. I didn't think to bring my magazines.
I thought about it too late.
Stephen.
I only had a few copies. But
Mr. Barron. Wait, let's get you the microphone. There you go.
So the subject I had proposed to you for which we didn't quite get to was artificial intelligence.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we had sort of started. Yes.
I think it's an important one. I have been an administrator of the Newcastle Politics and Policy Group, and I tried a little experiment when ChatGPT first came out. I posted an article that I had it right when it first came out about affordable housing and multifamily housing in Chappaqua. Hot subject. It wrote me a nice piece. I posted it. Here's an interesting article I came across. What do you think? To a group of about 1,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
No one figured out that it was not written by a human being. And that was when it first came out. So how is this going to impact
It's a
our
great
local
question.
press?
Anybody want to tackle it? Asher?
Yeah, I think it's an impending disaster. So one of the things is that, as I said, right, like the word new is in news. You're trying to, produce new stuff that the public doesn't know about yet. AI can't do that. All AI does is some assembly of vast amounts of data, and it interpolates and maybe extrapolates, but it's all based on the underlying data set. It's not generative. It can't create new information. So you're just getting some very sophisticated regurgitation. The other thing is, in terms of trust we were talking about, right? That's, I think, the forthcoming disaster is with trust in AI. There's no, when I put my name out there on an article, I'm standing by it. I can be sued for libel. It's a very high bar, but I still can. But what do you do when an algorithm creates something libelous, something defamatory? I just think it's going to open a rift in terms of the whatever trust is left in the sort of content generation business. Yeah.
Right.
It does have value, and that's why I think AI is a good reporting tool. But I think. Sorry. No, I don't. I think it's a tool, right? Like I use AI-based, digital tools right now. But I think the way you've seen things going, I worry, right, if AI instead of becoming a supplement to the reporting process, replaces the reporting process, that's when the danger sets in.
Hard to imagine, but so are a lot of things today. Anybody else on artificial intelligence? Oh, okay. Yeah.
How do you think that traditional journalism has been impacted by how, like, on the internet, anyone can be, like, a journalist, even though the internet doesn't really have, like, ethical or journalistic standards?
Good question.
Yeah.
Martin?
Yeah, that's a true statement, although there's still greater, I like to think, greater value and good value of when you see an organization's banner on it. You know where it's coming from, and presumably there are people with experience and some training behind that. I've seen some really good blogs online from just people. I mean, most of them are in, this, the sports arena. There are a lot of just fans who have. That's different. That's sports, but it's you can have a really good blog. I've seen them both with sports and politics. So yeah, anyone can be quote unquote a journalist, but it's under their blog. When you see locally here, when you see the Examiner, you see Lohud, that as an organization that stands, I hope, for something where you can trust what's in there, the content, and its accuracy.
Anybody else?
So we moved to Westchester about 30 years ago, and at that time, Lohud had zoned editions, right? So we lived in Yonkers. We had the Herald Statesman, and there was a lot more local content and reporting about school boards and local issues. And a city like Yonkers honestly needs like 2 or 3 Horace Greeleys just to provide the minimal oversight that's probably necessary. But I feel as a subscriber, that the paper's really been hollowed out over time, particularly with respect to the editorial and opinion section, which is really a shadow of what it was. And so I wanted to raise the issue of whether nonprofit community ownership of media could be a force in Westchester for improving coverage and content. And in other parts of the country, you have things like the Texas Tribune, we have ProPublica, not a lot of nonprofits, and we have local philanthropists here. We have billionaires that live here that could afford to perhaps buy back the Journal News from Gannett and operate it as a local paper. So there are a lot of good things that come with Gannett, but I think maybe we need to look at other models.
Yeah, and before I came to Westchester, I was in New Haven. You had the New Haven Register, and I worked for the New Haven Advocate, Alternative Weekly. We were hammering away, and then the Advocate went down, the Register retreat, and there is in New Haven New Haven Independent. It has foundation funding. It has sponsorships. It has corporate sponsorships. They have a staff. This guy, Paul Bass, who I worked with in New Haven back in the 80s, he founded it. He's still the editor of it. We're from the same era, still going. And he's built a beautiful thing there. But you need, you need a person, somebody who can take it and invest himself in it and build it up. And Westchester is so fragmented in a way. So I'm not sure how it would be done. It's, I think they're doing, you have the Independent along over in Irvington, over in that area. You've got a few of these, you got Bob Cox and then New Rochelle. You got a few of these little things happening, but in terms of a nonprofit, you would really, you need somebody who wants to go out and raise however much you got to raise.
There are still plenty of us who love the written word, who love reading certain columns because we just love how writers write. Do you have concerns from a stylistic/linguistic point of view that the quality of writing is deteriorating? Not the content, not the investigative skills, but do you see writing deteriorate because the emphasis is on getting things out quickly, competing with social media? Do you see that?
One of my questions was going to be, what about the pressure of who gets the story first and how that impacts your work? So that's a good question. Anybody?
It's that's always been a challenge. 50 years ago, if you were tight on deadline, you could see the story that you could tell as a 10-year-old. I could tell what story bumped right up against the deadline. So there wasn't a lot to it. It just gave the basic information. And then in those days, you would have multiple editions a day of like the Daily News or the Post, pre-Murdoch Post. They would have, half a dozen editions a day, and it would get updated, by, either the next day or 6 hours later. So that's always been a challenge when you're up against the deadline. But there's also, as far as there are, I think.
Discouraging if Inside Chappaqua tweets out the news while you're slaving away on 4 sources and takes away something from it. I'll try not to.
Okay. Not necessarily. It depends. Sometimes you get it first, sometimes you don't.
Right.
And we're, again, not under so speaking for the Examiner, we're not under the pressure of having something just to get it out there first. If that happens, whether it be Lohud, whether it be you, Grace, or anyone else that gets something in our backyard first, we'll just do more reporting.
For me personally, it's become, I don't want to rush anymore to be first. I feel like that's counterproductive ultimately, and hurts the field. Any other questions? Okay.
I have a question about town officials' delay and pandemic.
Town
Residents'
officials
delay
delay.
and pandemic. I'm just organizing.
Okay.
Just those. Okay. So residents with who go to the planning board meetings, who go to the architectural zoning, these are heated issues, and if you've filed FOILs, if you've paid filing fees, and it goes down a rabbit hole and no one answers, and they keep saying, I want to finish what I'm doing, so please vote for me again. To me, a newspaper is a place that we can go, and hopefully go, to have our views aired like that. Like, don't forget us. We've paid these fees. We deserve to be heard. So that's just my comment.
Thank you. All right. Anybody
we were
else?
Told that
Or
the pandemic delayed everything, but
one more question in the back there, Joan, and I think that will be our last question.
You were wrong in something you said before about the heyday of journalism. It was the early 1970s when I was the state editor on the Albany, on the AP State Wire in Albany.
That was
that was the heyday.
Yeah.
Guys,
What is your name, sir?
Harry Stanton.
Okay.
The medium is the message. And the message is electronic, guys. Get with it. The problem you are facing is that the Lohud website, as the gentleman said here, is terrible. Okay? If you want to keep working in journalism, folks from Lohud, if you want to keep working in journalism, you got to make that thing attractive. You got to make it interesting, and you got to give me back my crossword puzzle 7 days a week. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
I can't believe I am 20 years older than anyone, minimum 20 years old, if anyone at that page, and I'm married to the new tech, and you guys are not.
Well,
At least you're married.
I'm widowed, but that's a different. Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
No, I understand what you're saying. I think maybe pushing back.
Well,
on
let me
that,
just say that
go ahead.
the future of local journalism is electronic.
Yes,
Okay,
I mean,
and that's where you got to go. One interesting thing is we talked about there's too little journalism in Westchester. You're absolutely right. Westchester is a colonial era county. Government has not changed. We have approximately 100 separate units of government in this county of only 1 million people. And now we got one newspaper. That's the problem is not too little journalism. It may be too much government.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to everybody who came out tonight. Really appreciate that you took the time out. It's heartening. Thank you.